Scotland's Catholic community, who have this Easter lost a much-loved and compassionate leader. Just before recess, Mr Speaker, I had the privilege of leading the UK Government delegation to Washington DC and then on to Tartan Week in New York. This trip was a key part of my drive to promote brand Scotland around the world, to boost economic growth and create jobs here at home. And finally, Mr Speaker, to you, to members across this House and to Scotland's closest and most important neighbours, happy St George's Day. And I better answer these questions well, Mr Speaker, of course. It's too excited about St George's Day, so I am, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we should all be proud of Scotland's universities, of the contribution they make to Scotland's public life and their reputation as the best in the world. But 18 years of the SNP have left some of those proud institutions in dire straits. Job cuts and course closures are the inevitable product of the SNP's decision to deliver a 22% real terms cut to Scottish student funding since 2013. Scotland's universities, their staff and their students all need a Scottish Government with a proper plan to turn this crisis around. They need a new direction with Scottish Labour.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his answer and also his comments about the Pope. And I make my response within the context of my register of interest and also note my membership of the ECU. So the university sector in Scotland has never been in a worse state. It's in a state of crisis. There's job losses, both compulsory and voluntary, being contemplated right across the whole sector in Scotland. And it's young Scots that are paying the price. To balance the books, the Scottish Government is limiting the number of young Scots who can go to university, and this is forcing universities to more and more rely on recruitment of students from overseas. And I have to be clear about what this means. It means that often Scots are sitting at home unable to access a place, whereas students from overseas with lower qualifications are getting that place. And does the Secretary of State agree with me that Scotland's young people must be supported and the university sector must be fully funded in Scotland?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I also thank my honourable friend for this question, but also for what he does to support higher education in Scotland. Thanks to the SNP's higher education financial crisis, too many Scottish students, as he says, are missing out on places. Labour is committed to ensuring that Scottish students of all backgrounds can access university, and that can only be achieved with a new funding settlement which protects our world-leading universities and gives any Scottish student who wants to pursue the university route the opportunity to do so. I'm proud to have made it from Western Hills Education Centre in the Western Hills scheme to Edinburgh University, but that story is becoming all too rare under this SNP government. It's time for a new direction for Scottish universities.
Secretary of State Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks on the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis, and also wish all those not fortunate enough to be born north of Hadrian's Wall a very happy St George's Day. Now, whilst not quite a graduate of Aberdeen University, the Secretary of State is, like me, a beneficiary of a Scottish university education. Scotland has some of the finest and most respected higher education establishments in the world, but as we've seen last week at Aberdeen, in warnings from the University of Edinburgh, and most starkly at the University of Dundee, where over 600 jobs are being shed to make emergency savings, the current funding model overseen by the SNP is failing our institutions and our young people. On that, I know we agree, but will he also acknowledge the devastating impact on Scottish university budgets of his own government's national insurance increase, adding £45 million to their salary bills, or will he continue to defend this job-killing anti-growth tax on workers?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Secretary of State is defending the SNP's dreadful record with higher education in Scotland. It's quite clear from the University of Edinburgh, in terms of their principal, Peter Matheson, that the problems at the University of Edinburgh that they're having to deal with is a cause of underfunding of students from Scotland, and they've had to balance the books by an ever-increasing number of international students. The number of international students at Edinburgh University, as an example, is still going up, but isn't going up as high as projected, and that is the major cause of the financial problems at Scottish universities, and the Conservatives do well not to hide behind the SNP and support them in that process.
Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I associate myself with the comments that the Secretary of State made about the death of Pope Francis. I also agree with much of what has been said, in a rare consensus with both the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South West and the Scottish spokesperson for the Scottish Conservatives. Many universities are extremely concerned about the funding situation. Many of my constituents who are employees or have children at Scottish universities are concerned, particularly following the news of the 600 job cuts at Dundee University. And I have spoken to the principal of Edinburgh University, and he is also concerned about the funding model. It's the funding model in Scotland which is failing everyone. So can he please tell us where he is going to discuss with the Scottish Government how they can make changes, put pressure on them to do so. But I also have to say that the national insurance changes are not helpful. So it would be helpful to Scottish education if we could have some changes there as well.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the key thing here, and I think the Honourable Lady is slightly contradictory in her question, because on the one hand, she doesn't like the national insurance contribution increases, which has given the Scottish Government a £4.9 billion boost, the highest settlement in the history of devolution. That money should be going to the front line in terms of higher education, and it's not. But on the other hand, she talks about a more generous funding settlement for our universities. She can't have it both ways. So the funding model does have to change, and this Scotland office are in touch with all our principals at the university to see how we can work through this. But this is a problem with funding of higher education as a result of SNP policies in the Scottish Government.
Stephen Gaffney.
Speaker, can I associate myself with comments on the devastating loss of Pope Francis, and in particular the compassion that he showed to the most vulnerable in our society, and on a happier note to wish all friends and family a very happy St George's Day. I'll note my register of interest as well, Mr Speaker, in terms of higher education. He will know that the biggest financial impact on higher education in Scotland have been Westminster policies, which is why the sector in the UK is facing some challenges. National insurance increase, Brexit, that I know he passionately opposed or used to anyway, and the hostile environment. Now, Mr Speaker, Labour found common ground with Michael Gove in terms of sticking him into the House of Lords, but they also found common ground with him about his commitment to decentralising migration. That's had a particular impact on the higher education sector, not least in Dundee. That's been the biggest financial hit. Can you let us know what progress he's made on that commitment by Scottish Labour?
Mr Speaker, can I also just say to the honourable gentleman our deepest condolences to the loss of Christina McKelvey. I think that's the first time we've had Scottish questions to you and all your SNP colleagues. Mr Speaker, again, the honourable gentleman and his colleagues in the SNP voted against the budget, which delivered £4.9 billion extra for public services in Scotland. Some of that should have gone to frontline services, including making sure that our higher education sector was funded properly in the Scottish context. The SNP are very good at blaming everybody else for powers that don't belong to them, but actually what they should be doing is getting a mirror. And the only thing they have increased in the last 7 days in terms of using the budget that was given to them is £20,000 increases in the salaries for Scottish Government ministers who've all singularly failed.
Stephen Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his kind remarks about the sad loss of Christina McKelvey, and also note those kind remarks that were made by the Prime Minister as well, and the whole party is grateful for those. Now, since the Labour government doesn't want to talk about their commitments, let me help them out a little bit. We have time on Friday, this Friday, to discuss Scotland's particular migration needs, something backed by the care sector, the hospitality sector, tourism, and we know how crucial internationalisation is for the higher education sector in terms of education and research. So I ask him in the spirit of collegiality and in terms of the areas he's committed to and the areas in which Scottish Labour could work with us, instead of pandering to reform, as they too often do on the question of migration and our relationship with the EU, will he work with us ahead of that bill on Friday so that we can find some common cause to help the higher education sector?
Mr Speaker, again, complete denial about the problems in the higher education sector, which has devolved to the Scottish Government. We've made clear that the immigration system we inherited from the previous government is not working, that net migration is too high, that the interaction between migration and skills in the labour market is broken. Therefore, confidence in the whole system needs to be rebuilt. There's work underway in government to link the work of Skills England and their equivalents, the Migration Advisory Committee, the Industrial Strategy Council and the Department for Work and Pensions to form a new framework to identify sectors that either do or do not have the adequate workforce required and the workforce strategies in terms of skills for workforce of the future. There's been over-reliance on international recruitment, and we have lots and lots of 1 in 6 young people in Scotland, nearly 1 in 6 young people in Scotland neither in education, employment or training. That is a shambles and should be Scotland's shame, and we need to do something about it.
Clive Jones.
Question number 2, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, may I start by commending the honourable member for the consistent attention he's paid to this issue since he was elected last year and the education he's brought to all of us on it. Cancer remains Scotland's biggest killer, with Cancer Research UK reporting that Scots are receiving worse cancer treatment than their neighbours in other parts of the UK. The National Cancer Plan for England will save lives otherwise lost to cancer and deliver improved care and patient experience. Last year, a UK Labour budget delivered the biggest settlement for Scottish public services in the whole history of devolution. It's time for the Scottish Government to get up, step up and get serious about cancer.
Pat Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for her reply and her very kind remarks. Not a single NHS board in Scotland is meeting the 62-day cancer waiting time standard, just like in Wales and in England. It is a legacy of underinvestment from the SNP in Scotland, from Labour in Wales, and from the Conservatives in England. We need proper funding into cancer services to develop change to save lives. How will the Secretary of State for Scotland ensure his colleagues at the Department of Health understand the importance of fully funding cancer strategies to avoid disasters like that devised by the SNP?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let me reassure the honourable member this is a priority for the Government. But as healthcare is a devolved matter, the Scottish Government is responsible for its own cancer strategies, including diagnostic services in Scotland. But in England, improving early diagnosis of cancer, including breast cancer, is a priority for the UK Government. This Government is committed to transforming diagnostic services in England and will support the NHS to increase capacity to meet the demand for diagnostic services through investment in new capacity, including MRI and CT scanners.
Katrina Murray.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Stephen found out he had prostate cancer almost by accident when he was treated for something else. Thankfully, it was diagnosed early and he's on his way to a good outcome. Despite the fact that prostate cancer is the most common cancer for men in Scotland, it was not one of the tumour types which has been promoted for early diagnosis in the current Scottish Government cancer strategy. Will the Minister encourage the Scottish Government to make specific reference to prostate cancer when it's promoting early diagnosis?
Mr. Speaker, let me commend my honourable friend for her commitment to her constituents and pass on the best wishes of the whole House to Stephen with his recovery. Her constituents, like mine, are constantly on the receiving end of late diagnoses because of the underfunding of cancer services that my honourable friend opposite has mentioned. We will, of course, continue to raise this with the Scottish Government as part of our ongoing commitment to deal with Scotland's biggest killer, which is cancer.
Irene Campbell.
Question number 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Barnett formula, a Labour Chancellor and 37 Scottish Labour MPs, Scotland's public services have received the biggest ever financial settlement from the UK Government. But how have the SNP spent it? Well, despite the best efforts of our extraordinary NHS staff, every week thousands of Scots will wait more than 8 hours in A&E, and more than 100,000 Scots have been stuck on an NHS waiting list for over a year. Doctors, nurses and, most of all, Scottish patients have been failed by 18 years of SNP mismanagement. We desperately need a new direction.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a noticeable increase in the number of people contacting my office about accessing GP services, long waiting times for hospital appointments and operations. And if you live in the Isle of Arran and you actually get an appointment, quite often you can't get there because you can't get a ferry there and back to your appointment on the same day, which is a different point. However, as a former manager in the NHS, I've seen the consequences of the shortage of GPs in Scotland. There's been a recent successful recruitment campaign in England and in different parts of England. Does the Minister agree with me that it's time for the Scottish Government to utilise the Barnett consequentials in order to improve access to NHS services in Scotland through robust workforce planning and to follow the example of the NHS in England and get GPs successfully recruited?
Mr. Speaker, let me thank my honourable friend not just for her service to her constituents, but her previous service in the NHS. As she has noted, in England, thanks to Labour, NHS waiting lists have fallen month on month because this government has a plan and we have invested. But as my honourable friend sadly points out, it is a completely different story in Scotland, where her constituents, like mine, see a situation where almost 1 in 6 people are now stuck on a waiting list. John Swinney has announced this SNP government's 5th NHS recovery plan in less than 4 years. But patients and staff know it's not good enough and we need a new direction.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister speaks of the wonderful NHS staff that we have, and she's right. but she also speaks of a new direction that's required. Let me give you a clue as to what the possible new direction might be that you're speaking of. The Good Law Project revealed this month that more than 60% of donations to Labour's Health Secretary, totalling £372,000, came from individuals and companies linked to the private healthcare sector. So as the same Labour Health Secretary is so fond of saying, all roads lead to Westminster, including NHS funding. So with cuts to public services coming down the line, is the Secretary of State or the Minister worried about the influence of private health donors on his cabinet colleagues?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman says there have been cuts to public services. Let me put on record once again. This Labour government pledged to end austerity, and we have, with a record settlement for Scotland's public services, money that has been squandered by the SNP government, such that we are still in a situation where nearly 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list, whereas south of the border, waiting lists have fallen for the 5th month in a row. That's the difference a Labour government with a plan and willingness to fund it makes.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 4 and 15 together. I'm proud of the enormous contribution North Sea workers have made to our country, and that oil and gas will be an important part of our energy mix for decades to come. We have a workforce that leads the world, and we are determined to secure their long-term future in the energy industry, including oil and gas. The UK Government will soon respond to our recent consultation on supporting the energy transition in the North Sea, and I'm in the North East tomorrow, turning on a wind farm and also meeting leaders in the oil and gas sector.
Sir Ashley.
Mr. Speaker, if the UK achieves net zero in 2050, we will still consume about 14 billion barrels of oil and gas a year. We are currently on track to produce 4 billion barrels a year. Will the Secretary of State explain why he prefers to import our energy than produce it ourselves?
Mr. Speaker, our national mission of this Labour government is to get to clean power by 2030, but that means 3 things. It means renewable power, it means nuclear power, and it also means oil and gas. As I've said already, oil and gas will be with us in the Scottish and UK context for decades to come.
Harry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent report by Offshore Energies UK showed that if the UK oil and gas basin was continued to be used until 2050, it could produce half of our oil and gas needs. That would do wonders for jobs in the North East of Scotland, the North East economy, our energy security, the energy transition, and it would also bring in £12 billion to the Treasury. On top of that, it would also bring in £150 billion of economic growth to the UK, which I'm sure everyone in this House and the government would welcome. So will the Secretary of State please have a word with the Energy Secretary and ask him to stop his policies, which are continuing to ruin our oil and gas sector, and for once back North East Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady mentions the oil and gas sector in 2050, and I've already mentioned this back to us, as is the Secretary of State, Des Nez, that oil and gas will be with us for decades to come, including to 2050.
Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there's an opportunity for significant economic growth in Scotland from getting a just transition from oil and gas to clean power right? In my Edinburgh North and Leith constituency at the Port of Leith, you can see the land and space previously used for oil and gas sector has been transformed by investment from Forth Ports to the largest renewable hub in Scotland. Will he join with me in welcoming this investment in Leith and outline how his department will help secure every job possible in the transition from oil and gas?
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for the work that she's doing, particularly in her constituency in the Port of Leith, to make sure we can have the transition and have it well. But what she highlights is the important thing about this particular issue and debate, that the energy mix requires us to have renewable power and clean energy by 2030, but also requires us to have nuclear power, and it also requires us to have oil and gas. The energy mix means we do it all. It's not either or.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State rightly outlines how important oil and gas sector is to Scotland and to the workers and businesses rely on it. But if we are to have a truly just transition, we need to invest in new technologies like hydrogen now. And that's therefore, will he join me in welcoming the shortlisting of the Selmsmuir hydrogen project in the Livingston constituency? It's been shortlisted for UK government support, and can outline how this will benefit the Livingston constituency.
Mr. Speaker, on the 7th of April, the UK Government announced the 8th Scottish project had been shortlisted for the next stage of the HAR2 process. I and my ministerial colleagues look forward to working with industry to deliver our vision for a thriving low-carbon hydrogen economy in the UK, and of course commend my honourable friend for the work that he's done in pushing forward the project in his Livingston constituency.
Secretary of State Andrew Marr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State, does he agree with the Scottish Labour leader who says that there is no question it has to be new oil and gas? Or does he agree with his colleague, the Energy Secretary, who's banned new licences in the North Sea and is overseeing an accelerated decline of the UK's oil and gas basin?
Mr. Speaker, there's obviously a consultation on the just transition happening with the department at the moment in terms of the Secretary of State that he refers to. But I just go back to my previous answers. In order to get to clean power by 2030, in order for us to have an energy mix in this country, you require oil and gas, you require renewables, and you require nuclear. It's a simple process.
Goodbye.
Well, I think we all heard there, and I'm sure Anna Sarwar certainly heard there. He was unable to agree with his own leader in Scotland. So in hawk to the UK Labour Party that he can't stand up for Scottish workers or its oil and gas industry, and can't even agree with their own leader in Scotland. It's always been the party interest over the national interest with Labour, and no notice taken of its Scottish Labour Party. 10 years ago, the Scottish Labour Party was described by its own leader at the time as simply being the branch office. Nothing has changed, has it?
Mr. Speaker, the sole purpose of this government initially in the first few months was to clean up the mess that his government left of this country, which included the £22 billion black hole. We'll get on with delivering our missions, including clean power by 2030. That's what we're focused on, because that's what's good for jobs, good for bills, and good for the environment.
Robin Swan.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, under the Windsor framework, the Northern Ireland plant health label allows growers and traders to move plants and seeds for planting from Great Britain to Northern Ireland without a phytosanitary certificate, and Scottish businesses have benefited from this. For example, more than 1,500 tonnes of previously prohibited seed potatoes have moved to Northern Ireland from Great Britain last year, mostly from Scottish traders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will know that McIntyre's fruit and plant in Scotland has actually said that it's easier to supply Japan than it is to send plants to Coleman's nurseries in my constituency in South Antrim. And the same company has now seen orders cancelled in Northern Ireland. At the weekend, Ewing Seafoods, Northern Ireland's oldest fishmonger, had a 40-foot container filled with hundreds of thousands of pounds of fresh fish returned from Belfast to Scotland due to administrative paperwork errors on 7 boxes. So will the Minister or Secretary of State meet with me in representation of those companies to see what can be done to ease what is a bureaucratic burden on Northern Ireland business and Scottish business?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be delighted to meet with the honourable gentleman, but let me reassure him the Horticultural Working Group, co-chaired by senior officials from DEFRA and the Cabinet Office, has been set up specifically to tackle issues around movement of seeds to consumers in Northern Ireland as a first priority. I know he's mentioned other topics too, and I'm very happy to meet with him on them. That group meets regularly to address issues and includes representatives of the Ulster Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union and the Horticultural Trades Association. Business leaders, as well as a small number of other horticultural businesses, also sit on that working group. I'd be delighted to discuss this further with him.
Chris Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland produces world-class potatoes that supply our iconic fish and chip shops, like the Real Food Cafe and the Green Welly Stop in Tyndrum, Vincenzo's in Stirling, whose fish supper won an award last year, and Corrieri's in Causeway Head, where Robert and Peter Corrieri retired this year after decades of service. Will the Minister recognise their value to our local economies and say what more can be done to support the supply chains linking Scottish growers to these much-loved businesses?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend will be aware that potatoes are, of course, a staple of our national dish, haggis, neeps and tatties. They're a staple of my favourite breakfast, the dry potato scone. I'm delighted to join him in recognising all of the fish and chip shops in his constituency, and I'd be delighted to accept invitations for a fish and chip shop tour from any of my colleagues across the House to recognise their vital contribution.
David Mundell.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that wasn't for me. We know that this will be a concerning time for businesses in Scotland. In 2024, 12.3% of goods exported from Scotland were to the US. That is why the UK government is focused on negotiating an economic deal with the US. As the Business and Trade Secretary made clear in his statement to this House on the 3rd of April, The Government is resolute in our support for industries across the whole of the UK, and ministers and officials will continue to engage with the businesses to understand the impact that these tariffs may have.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the comments on Pope Francis and indeed Christina McKelvey, and wish you, Mr. Speaker, a happy St George's Day. It's very important that we all celebrate our national identities, but still come together as one united kingdom. I hope that the Secretary of State and I were not too optimistic in our last exchange on trade with the US when we hoped that the Trump administration would actually be a boost for Scottish business in the United States. Can he tell us specifically, though, what he's doing in terms of the UK discussions with the United States to ensure that specific Scottish interests, like the whisky industry, are part of those arrangements?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said at this dispatch box before, it's vital we do all we can to strengthen our diplomatic, cultural and business ties with the United States. I was in Washington and New York for Tartan Week on the week that tariffs were imposed on the rest of the world, and made the case for Scotch whisky and Scottish businesses in particular. We're engaging with Scottish exporters and industry representatives to assess the potential impact of US tariffs and remain in contact with US counterparts. Our pragmatic and calm approach has been overwhelmingly welcomed by business and industry. We will not conduct this important issue in a knee-jerk way to get retweets like some others in this House.
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State join with me in welcoming the pragmatic and calm approach of our Prime Minister on this issue, in the clear interests of businesses and consumers, and in contrast to those on the opposite benches who seem only interested in social media and quick headlines?
I couldn't agree with my honourable friend more. The pragmatic approach from the Prime Minister and this Government in terms of this issue has been welcomed by industry and businesses right across the United Kingdom. That is in the national interest of the United Kingdom to do so, and we work very hard together to make sure the impact of US tariffs on the UK are not as bad as we thought they might be.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Steve Darling.
Question 1.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the entire House will join me in paying tribute to His Holiness Pope Francis, an extraordinary man. His lifelong work on fairness will leave a lasting legacy. And people of all backgrounds and beliefs were inspired by his humility and his compassion. And I think the outpouring of grief and love that we've seen in the last 2 days or so shows the respect and admiration that was held in around the world. Mr. Speaker, I will attend his funeral on Saturday and pay tribute to his courage and to his leadership. May His Holiness rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, may I also wish everyone in England a very happy St George's Day. There is a lot to celebrate: our history, our values and our culture. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition, by duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I also wish the Chamber a happy St George's Day. After a cost of living crisis overseen by the previous chaotic Conservative government, many in the tourist industry in Torbay believed that they had weathered the storm, as they had believed in Devon and Cornwall. However, with the government's NIC hikes and effective jobs tax, many in the tourist industry in Torbay fear that this could be the last nail in the coffin of some of those businesses. So in light of this summer, will the Prime Minister give me the pleasure of showing him round Paynton Zoo and seeing this outstanding, amazing tourism attraction in Torbay, one of many across the west of England who are sadly being massively impacted by this jobs tax?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's very... Well, look, may I start by wishing Jenny, his guide dog, a very happy birthday, I think, for yesterday. 6 years old, although she doesn't look particularly interested in my answer, I have to say. Mr. Speaker, look, I do recognise the importance of tourism to his beautiful constituency. I've been there many times, worked there for a short time, and driving growth and creating jobs. We've announced a new Visitor Economy Advisory Council
which will work with business to deliver a new strategy focused on supporting growth and the tourism industry. Visit Britain has also launched a new international marketing campaign to showcase Britain's incredible heritage, culture and landscapes. And I know the Minister of Tourism would be happy to keep him updated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme hasn't been uprated with inflation since 2012, meaning compensation for victims of violent crime, including rape and child abuse, is worth less than half what it was then in real terms. The consultation response published before Easter said there wasn't the money to look at changing the scope, tariffs or time limits, despite expert advice and the recommendations of the ICSA review. So will the Prime Minister commit to properly funding the Ministry of Justice to do this vital reform work so victims and their needs can become a priority instead of an afterthought?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable friend knows my personal commitment to delivering justice for victims of crime who've been completely failed over the last 14 years. We are improving access to compensation through better online systems and equipping staff with the skills they need to better support victims. We are, of course, also consulting on a revised victims code that will increase the powers of the Victims Commissioner to ensure more accountability, and I'm happy to ensure that she meets the relevant minister to discuss those issues.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I also wish everyone a happy St. George's Day? Yes. And can I also associate myself with remarks about the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis on Easter Monday? Being married to a Catholic, I know the profound loss for millions in Britain and across the world. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister now accept that when he said that it was the law that trans women were women, he was wrong?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I welcome the Supreme Court ruling on this issue. It brings clarity and it will give confidence to women and, of course, to service providers. The Equality and Human Rights Commission will now issue updated guidance, and it's important that that happens and that all service providers then act accordingly. This government's approach and my approach has been as follows: to support and implement the Supreme Court ruling, and we will; to continue to protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex, and we will; but also to ensure that trans people are treated with respect, and we will; and to ensure that everybody is given dignity in their everyday lives. I do think this is the time now to lower the temperature, to move forward, and to conduct this debate with the care and compassion that it deserves. And I think that should unite the whole House.
Mr. Speaker, he can't bring himself to admit that he was wrong. That was the question. But he spoke about respect and dignity and compassion and lowering the temperature. So will he now apologise to the member for Canterbury, the very brave member for Canterbury, for hounding her out of the Labour Party simply for telling the truth?
Mr. Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, for why. Because when we lose sight of that approach and make this a political football, as happened in the past, then we end up with the spectacle of a decent man, and he was a decent man, the previous Prime Minister, diminishing himself at this dispatch box by making trans jokes whilst the mother of a murdered trans teenager watched from the public gallery just up there. That will never be my approach. My approach will be to support the ruling, to protect single-sex spaces and treat everybody with dignity and respect. And I believe there's a consensus in this House and the country for that approach.
Mr. Speaker, there was no apology for the member for Canterbury. There is no taking of responsibility. He talks about political football. He practically kicked her out of his party. Constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal. He talks about my predecessor. What about the abuse I faced from his MPs calling me a transphobe for supporting what the Supreme Court has now clarified in his words? And where was he? He hid for 6 days without commenting on the Supreme Court judgment. Why did it take him so long to respond? Isn't it because he was scared?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, the only fiction here is the idea she delivered anything in office. She held the post of Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years, and she did precisely nothing. She provided no clarity on the law, did nothing to improve women's lives, which got materially worse under her watch. They talk, for example, about hospitals and mixed-sex wards, uphill and downdale. What happened in the last decade? The use of mixed-sex wards in our NHS rose by 2,000%. And there's a pattern of behaviour here. Women and Equalities Minister failed to do anything for women. The Trade Minister, who failed to get a trade deal with the US. The Business Minister, who failed to get a deal with British Steel. She's a spectator, not a leader.
Mr. Speaker, I will tell him what I did. I stopped the gender. I will. Yes. When his Labour leader in Scotland was whipping his MSPs to get male rapists into women's prisons, I stopped that gender recognition deal. I helped commission the CAS review. I replaced the guidance on single-sex toilets. I made sure that the puberty blockers issue was resolved while he was sitting there cheering on the ideology that was taking away safe spaces. And when the Prime Minister stayed silent last week, presumably waiting for what Morgan McSweeney thinks, on his WhatsApp groups, some of his closest ministers were plotting to overturn the Supreme Court decision. Labour MP after Labour MP stood up yesterday and challenged the ruling. How can we take his government seriously on this?
Well, I think the WhatsApp group you should be worried about is the one of his shadow Justice Secretary. And Mr. Speaker, the mask has slipped just 1 week before the elections because the shadow Justice Secretary is not here. A man who's doing everything he can to replace her. The man that most of them want as leader of their party has admitted that Reform and the Tories are working together. He said, I want this fight to be united. He said he's determined to bring this coalition, he calls it, together one way or another. Well, I think we know what that means. Every Tory voter is appalled at the thought of paying for the NHS. Every Reform voter who hates what the Tories did the last 14 years, they're not Conservatives, they're a con.
Who's playing political football now? He's got no answers, Mr. Speaker. He's got no answers. Yesterday, Labour MP after Labour MP challenged the ruling. He should be more worried about his backbenchers than my frontbenchers. His Labour ministers called the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission appalling. Baroness Faulkner's role is critical to enforcing the court's judgment. She has had to put up with relentless abuse, not just from his front bench, but from activists and ideologues. Reappointing her will be a clear sign that he is taking this issue seriously. So will he commit to reappointing Baroness Faulkner when her term expires this year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've always said the debate should be conducted properly on the principles of debate. I've said it many, many times. But I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that when they were in government, violence against women and girls reached record highs, rape prosecutions fell to record lows, and millions of women were left stuck on NHS waiting lists, unable to get the health care that they needed. Under this Labour government, NHS waiting lists down by more than 200,000, domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms. We strengthen access to maternity pay, something she calls excessive. She talks about political footballs, but a coalition between Reform and the Tories being formed behind her back, we know what that means when the Shadow Justice Secretary and the member for Clacton cook up their joint manifesto, NHS charging a pro-Russia foreign policy, enter workers' rights. Just as the Love government lost control of the economy, the borders and health, in 6 short months, she's lost control of her party.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls. The Prime Minister only tells people what they want to hear. He only tells people what they want to hear. He is a weather vane who twists in the wind. He cheered an ideology that denied safe spaces to women and girls because he thought it was cool to do so. He hounded a brave female MP out of his party for telling the truth he accepts now. And now he is hiding behind the Supreme Court judgment. And isn't that because he doesn't know what he actually believes?
I can only assume that sounded better when she did it in the mirror earlier on. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what the Leader of the Opposition says, because nobody believes, none of them, that she's going to lead them into the next election anyway. It's going to be the shadow justice. He's away plotting. That's why he's not here today, Mr. Speaker. And the member for Clacton fighting over the bones of the Tory party. And they think Reform are going to give them their votes without changing their policy. Absolutely no way. The member for Clacton's going to do what he always does, eat the Tory party for breakfast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wish you and the House a happy St George's Day as well. I recently had the pleasure to visit the National Gas Operations in Peterborough, where the company was announcing a £350 million investment in the UK, including 100 new jobs at least in my constituency. This investment will make Peterborough the centre of the nation's core gas and hydrogen network. But one of the big challenges that infrastructure projects like this face is the lack of available skills and training for young people. So can I ask the Prime Minister what more he can do to boost apprenticeships in places like mine and ensure we create the opportunities this country so desperately needs?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? The net zero transition is a huge economic opportunity for this country, despite the naysayers on the opposition benches. And we've had almost £44 billion of investment since July, and that will deliver jobs across the country, including in his constituency. Investment, presumably, they don't want. We're ensuring we've got skilled workers that we need, launching the Skills England and our new growth and skills offer to encourage even more apprenticeships, and supporting industry-led plan for hydrogen to deliver the workforce needed for the industry of the future.
Shred David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also wish the House and the country a happy St George's Day? And can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the late Pope Francis? As a Christian myself, I found his compassion absolutely inspiring, and my prayers are with Catholics in the UK and across the world who will feel his loss particularly deeply. Mr. Speaker, I've raised with the Prime Minister before the issue of North Devon District Hospital. The last government promised to rebuild it, as they did hospitals across the southwest in places like Torbay and Musgrove Park. Unfortunately, they broke that promise, leaving appalling conditions like sewage leaks and patients being treated in corridors. So will the Prime Minister reconsider his decision to further delay the construction of new hospitals and ask his MPs to vote for our motion today for new hospitals?
Mr. Speaker, the previous programme, the party opposite, was undeliverable and unaffordable, as I think he knows and accepts. We put the new hospital programme on a sustainable footing with a timeline that can be met. We're not prepared to trade on false promises as they did. And obviously, we put record investment into the NHS. But I do just gently urge him to one day get a bit more serious about the funding of these measures, because every week he comes here to basically push me on two issues: to spend a lot more money, but at the same time, in the next breath, opposing the measures in the budget to raise the money that's necessary.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Prime Minister, we had a funded programme at the election. And I'm disappointed with his reply, and I hope he'll actually visit some of these hospitals to see the urgent need for rebuilding. Mr. Speaker, at Merton Mead Farm in Oxfordshire last week, I saw world-class British beef farmers at work. Farmers want him to be careful in any trade deal with President Trump. They were let down by the Conservatives' appalling trade deals and worried that a bad US deal could see American agribusiness undercut them with inferior meat. So will the Prime Minister guarantee a vote in this House on any trade deal that he agrees with the United States?
he raises a really important point of real interest and importance to farmers. We will negotiate, as he would expect, in the national interest and uphold the highest animal welfare standards. We are making progress on that, and then there'll be a process if a deal is reached.
Catherine Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time last year, train manufacturing at Alstom in Derby was grinding to a halt. On a single day, workers with a combined welding experience of nearly 1,000 years walked out of its doors. But the whole city came together with crucial backing from this Prime Minister. And what a difference a year makes. With Alstom saved and set to host the greatest gathering to celebrate 200 years of rail, and our railways coming back into public ownership with the headquarters of Great British Railways in Derby, will the Prime Minister agree that with Labour, we are back on track?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's a fantastic champion for Derby. She's right, whether it's the workforce I met at Alstom or the workers at Hitachi in County Durham, we will support our rail industry, providing certainty that delivers jobs, investment and security for them. I met these workforces. I know how worried they were a year ago, she rightly says, when this government was in charge. I'm really proud that Derby will be the home of Great British Railways, because we're bringing railways back into public ownership, delivering better services for passengers, cutting delays and cancellations, and boosting growth across the country.
Robin Swall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister and my party in regards to the condolences to the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is often referred to his time working in Northern Ireland, and I've spoken to one of his bosses who speaks of his diligence. I wonder in that vein, could he speak to his Northern Ireland team about their understanding of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement? Because the Secretary of State in an interview seemed to think that it had been negotiated by Ian Paisley rather than David Trimble and my party. His Northern Ireland Minister has said at the start of this week that the future of Northern Ireland as part of the Union is dependent on opinion polls, and she wasn't sure if she was a Unionist. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me his understanding of the principle of consent and confirm to this House that he is a Unionist?
I thank him for that question, and I did work in Northern Ireland for 5 years and therefore appreciate firsthand how important these issues are. And it was a very formative period for me in terms of my career and my thinking. The Good Friday Agreement is one of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. I pay tribute to everybody who helped bring that around, because, as he will know and other members will know, it was such an important moment in the history of the conflict. And I absolutely stand full square behind the principles, some of which I was doing my part to help implement when I was working in Northern Ireland. They will always drive me on the issues that he raises with me.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you. Happy St George's Day, Mr. Speaker, and may I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about Pope Francis. Mr. Speaker, after 14 years of Conservative government, too many of my Middlesbrough and Thornbury East constituents live on low incomes or in real poverty. I very much welcome the employment support proposals in the Welfare Green Paper, but the government has to be clear about the real opportunities it's offering more than 3 million families who it says will lose out financially as a result of this package. So before asking MPs to vote, can he confirm that we will see fresh OBR analysis, evidence on who will be affected by the PIP changes, and the government's own assessment of the employment impact of its measures? And will he confirm that this policy will not result in increased experience of poverty?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are reforming a broken system, the system that we inherited, and I think most people accept that it needs reform because it traps people in unemployment and inactivity, and we need to reform it for that reason. The principles will be that we will provide support where support is needed. Where people do want to get into work, we will help them into work. The current system operates against people getting into work who want to make that transition, and that if you can work, you should work. Moving into work is what halves your risk of being in poverty. And that's why we've invested £1 billion in tailored employment support. And of course, we're introducing a new premium for those with the most severe lifelong disabilities who will never be able to work.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. Last week, former steelworkers in Port Talbot watched in dismay as this government deemed their livelihoods worth less than those in Scunthorpe. FOIs reveal that the UK government doesn't know how its funding for reskilling workers in Wales is being used, or even how many people are being retrained. We know concerns have been raised by the Transition Board. If this government can't explain how it's helping Port Talbot's laid-off workers to build a future through reskilling, why shouldn't those workers then come to the logical conclusion that Labour has abandoned them?
She raised a really important issue in relation to Port Talbot. I've visited a number of times and heard firsthand from the workforce there. And she may or may not know that even in opposition before the election, I was talking to the owners to try to persuade them to delay their decisions because I knew an election was coming. That's how important I thought it was. I would remind her that at the same time, the then Prime Minister refused to pick up a call to the First Minister to even discuss the issue. I took a different approach because I realised just how important it was. I would remind her, because she compares it with the decisions we took last week, that the blast furnaces were turned off in January of last year, the coke ovens in March 2024, and therefore that was before the election. That was the very thing I was trying to ensure didn't happen for reasons that she and the workforce will understand, and I was talking to the workforce throughout that. What we've been able to do there since then is to negotiate an improved deal with Tata. We did that within 10 weeks, better terms for the workers. We're working hard to maximise opportunities from the £1.25 billion investment in electric arc furnace and supporting those with job losses with £80 million of funding to learn new skills, supply chains and protect communities. But I mean, she talks about protecting working people, but she voted against the biggest settlement, devolution settlement, since devolution. That includes more money for public services, including the NHS, and they voted against it.
Can I commend the Prime Minister and his government for the action taken so far to reform the NHS in England, making it fit for the modern day with improved technology, more GPs and appointments, and waiting lists cut for consecutive months. However, it is deeply unfortunate that in Scotland we have an SNP government that has made the political choice to waste taxpayers' money on vanity projects, flawed legislation and failed court cases rather than focus on improving our health service. Does he agree with me that the people of Airdrie and Shotts, who have been promised a new hospital for almost a decade, deserve far better than suffering and pain on waiting lists and receiving treatment in crumbling buildings as a direct consequence of SNP incompetence?
My honourable friend is a real champion for Airdrie and Shotts. And over 60,000 Scots have been stuck waiting for tests or treatments for over a year. That's a 46% rise in 1 year. And yet almost 50,000 fewer operations have been carried out compared with before the pandemic. And compare what the SNP are doing with what we're doing here in England. We've driven down waiting lists within 6 months, 6 months worth of reductions in a row with over 3 million extra appointments. Scotland's NHS urgently needs change, but the SNP has no strategy, no plan and absolutely no ideas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The danger posed by China to our national security is self-evident. So can the Prime Minister explain why he and his government have chosen to treat Beijing as a business partner and not as the hostile state that it truly is?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've set out our approach to China a number of times. It's not materially different to the approach of the last government in the last years of the last government, I might just add. And in relation to Scunthorpe, of course, the deal that we had to deal with during recess was the deal negotiated by the last government. We've taken sensible decisions in the national interest and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will join me in celebrating the opening of the new Brixton Blood Donation Centre in my constituency, which in 3 months has seen over 3,700 people donate, over 1,000 of them first-timers and 10% of them black. However, with sickle cell anemia, the fastest growing genetic condition in the UK, this is not enough. Demand for the RO blood subtype, more common in people of African descent, is rising 10 to 15% annually and is crucial for treating sickle cell. Rules around travel as well as inaccurate iron tests are seeing willing black donors turned away for 4 to 12 months. Of course, blood donation must be safe, but failure to review these guidelines is costing lives. So will the Prime Minister commit to reviewing these rules and join me in calling on you, Mr. Speaker, to help us all play our part by facilitating a biannual blood drive in Parliament?
Well, I'll leave that to you, Mr. Speaker. It's for me to suggest that you donate your blood. Well, I'm sure you do, and we can support this jointly. And actually, across the House, we should take that up under your leadership, Mr. Speaker. But let me join her in welcoming the new Brixton Blood Donor Centre and the life-saving support that it provides. Increasing donor diversity is a priority for the NHS, and we're working to increase raw blood donations by engaging with communities who are more likely to have this blood type. And I'll make sure that she meets the relevant health minister to discuss what more we can do in this area.
Sir David Davis.
British governments of all political persuasions have long taken pride in reducing the carbon footprint of British manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, in too many cases, and too much of it, of this so-called reduction has been achieved by driving British industry abroad to other countries, like China and India, that actually use more carbon to produce the same product. British steel is just the latest of this, which is bad for the global environment and also disastrous for the British economy. And this is against a background of European carbon policies that have failed over 20 years. So does the Prime Minister have a new domestic British policy which will protect British industry from this long-term disastrous trend?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are doing everything available to us to protect car building in this country, and he will have noticed that 2 weeks ago I made announcements about the Z mandate and what more we could do to support the industry at the moment. That was an immediate response to circumstances as they were, but I indicated at the time, and I do so again, that we will do whatever it takes to support our car industry.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Billy spent months trying to see a GP to investigate his symptoms. It took 4 months of telephone appointments before we finally got seen in person and actually got the test that diagnosed stage 4 cancer. A delay in diagnosis, which has dramatically changed his prognosis. And as someone who's become a friend, it hurts me to see the pain he is now living in. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that primary care is a vital part of the healthcare system and we need wider access to both in-person appointments and to telephone ones?
Well, I'm deeply sorry to hear about Billy's case, and I'm sure the whole House is. And our focus has to be on making sure GPs spend more time caring for patients. And that includes the investment of an additional £889 million into general practice in England, and putting over 1,500 GPs into surgeries since October. We did deliver a record settlement for Scotland's public services to help fix our NHS and ensure people like Billy get the care that they deserve.
John Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through the ages, an innovative and vibrant City of London has underpinned investment and growth in the wider economy. But the main challenge the city currently faces is how to get more capital into capital markets. Now, I believe, and many believe, that London can gain new momentum if the government takes bold action to challenge and empower those who steward our pension assets to do things in new ways. So I asked the Prime Minister, following the decision of the Chancellor to offer continuity of leadership at the FCA, will he convene an urgent number 10 summit with city leaders and the regulators to reset and to maximise the chances that the city can lead economic growth and recovery in these times of grave uncertainty and turmoil?
He's right that we need to go further and faster in terms of kick-starting growth, attracting the investment we need to create jobs, and our regulators must regulate for growth and not just for risk. And we do want that continuity of leadership that he mentions, and we are convening and getting people together to drive that growth, and we'll take away the ideas that he puts on the table.
Listen to him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Proposed changes to personal independence payments mean that people who require various levels of support due to lifelong conditions such as learning disabilities will not meet the new eligibility criteria. However, the Green Paper introduces a group of people with lifelong conditions who will not be subject to reassessment. Can the Prime Minister confirm that people with a learning disability, which is a lifelong condition that will not change, will be included in the group of claimants who will not be subjected to repeated reassessments?
Well, thank her for her question. I know this means a lot to her. We're clear on the principles for reform, protecting those with the most severe disabilities who will never be able to work, as she references, and making sure people with the most severe disabilities and health conditions will never face the prospect of being constantly reassessed again. We are making sure that extra financial support is based on the impact of health condition or disability, not the capacity to work, and I can reassure her we're carefully considering options for transitional protection.
Directo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Chancellor's economic policies started off badly and have headed rapidly downhill from there. His Energy Secretary's policies ensure that energy-rich Scotland lives under the highest domestic and commercial energy prices in the world, and his Foreign Secretary provides diplomatic cover for the atrocities committed in Gaza by the IDF, to the horror of the people of Scotland. This is just one, but he is the incompetent in chief who refuses to bring his ministers into line. Just one of the reasons that independence enjoys an 11-point lead over remaining in this dysfunctional, broken Brexit Britain. Does he understand why the people of Scotland are so dissatisfied with the latest iteration of dysfunctional British rule in Scotland?
Yeah. Does he understand the electorate in Scotland answered that question in July of last year? I remember there used to be quite a few of them sitting around here. Now it's a distant cry from up there.
Final questions are resulted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, humanitarian law organisations applied for an arrest warrant for Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar over alleged war crimes in Gaza, including the siege of Kamal Adwan Hospital and the torture of its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safir. Yet the red carpet was rolled out. Saar has justified blocking vital humanitarian aid into Gaza, backed the illegal annexation of Palestinian land, and rejected a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister is a human rights lawyer, so surely he knows that the UK has a legal duty to uphold international law. Why then did he block the arrest of an unindicted war criminal?
I didn't.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions.